On her very first day in Paris, Julia tasted a pan-seared sole so delicate and unforgettable that it felt like falling in love for the first time. From that moment on, this city was no longer just a place she had moved to with her husband. It became the beginning of her romantic encounter with food, flavor, and a new version of herself. Julia's husband, Paul, was an American diplomat stationed in France. Because the couple had never been able to have children, Paul often spent his free time taking Julia through the streets and alleys of Paris, searching for unforgettable meals. They tasted the city one dish at a time, from elegant restaurants to quiet little cafes hidden in the corners of the city. What Julia never expected was that during these food adventures, Paul slowly developed a real talent for photography. Before long, he even held his own photography exhibition. Julia was genuinely happy for him, but while celebrating Paul's passion, she suddenly realized that her own life still felt empty. She also wanted something that truly belonged to her. She wanted a passion strong enough to fill the rest of her life.
What is it that you really like to do?
Eat.
When Paul asked what she truly loved, Julia could not give a clear answer. She loved food, but she had no idea what that love could become. She certainly never imagined it could turn into a lifelong career. Luckily, Paul did not laugh at her confusion. Instead, he gave her enough support, and Julia finally decided to quit her dull clerical job at the embassy. After that, she tried all kinds of hobby classes, hoping one of them would light a fire inside her. But before long, the things that once seemed interesting slowly became dull and meaningless. Just when Julia felt completely lost, Paul gave her a French cookbook for her birthday. That simple gift quietly pointed her toward a new direction. To understand the difficult French recipes, Julia hired a French tutor, but she soon discovered that even Paul, who spoke excellent French, could only understand part of what was written in those cookbooks. As for actually cooking the dishes, that was another challenge entirely. Julia searched through every bookstore she could find in Paris, hoping to buy an English-language book about French cooking, but after searching everywhere, she still could not find one that truly helped Americans cook French food at home. At first, all she wanted was to make a proper French meal for her husband with her own hands, but she never imagined that such a simple wish would lead her down such a long and difficult road. So Julia decided to stop struggling with books and go straight to the source. She enrolled at the famous Le Cordon Bleu cooking school in Paris. Even more daringly, she skipped the basic course and applied for the professional class, a class that almost no women joined at the time. The school warned her again and again that the tuition was expensive and that every other student in the class was a male chef. But Julia had already made up her mind. She chose to walk into that room anyway. However, the very first lesson hit her confidence hard. The male students handled their knives with speed and precision, while Julia, who had rarely cooked seriously before, could barely deal with the onion in front of her. Surrounded by their dismissive looks, she stood there awkwardly, like someone who had stepped into the wrong world. Thankfully, the teacher did not give up on her. He patiently showed her how to hold the knife and how to cut properly. When Julia returned home, she bought piles of onions and practiced again and again. She chopped until her hands grew tired. She practiced until the kitchen was filled with the sharp smell of onions, and through pure persistence, she slowly began to catch up. Before long, Julia was no longer the clumsy woman the men had looked down on. By the third week, she finally mastered the first real French dish of her life, a French omelette. The teacher's approval and the joy of creating something with her own hands gave Julia a feeling she had never known before. At that moment, she became certain that cooking was not just a hobby, it was the thing she had been searching for. As Julia learned one classic French dish after another, the one-year course gradually approached its end. But just when graduation seemed within reach, the school director still refused to let her take the final exam. After Paul learned what had happened, he bought Julia a Chinese mortar as a graduation gift. In front of their friends, he explained that the gift had two meanings. First, it honored the time when he and Julia had met and fallen in love in China. Second, it celebrated the fact that Julia had finally found the passion she wanted to devote her life to. Paul's thoughtfulness helped ease Julia's disappointment. In the days that followed, their home kitchen became her own private stage. Under Paul's gentle gaze, Julia kept cooking, testing, and improving. Then one day, at a dinner hosted by the embassy, Julia unexpectedly met two former students from the cooking school. With their help, she finally earned the chance to take the graduation exam. Although she eventually received the certificate she had dreamed of, the school director still could not resist giving her a cold reminder.
Madame Shield, I must tell you, you have no real talent for cooking.
But the director had no idea that Julia's real life was only just beginning to change. Soon after, one of her former classmates invited her to open a small cooking school together. The work did not bring in much money, but it gave Julia friendship, purpose, and a reason to keep moving forward. Later, that same friend invited Julia to help write a book that would teach Americans how to cook French food. Julia agreed without hesitation, but writing a cookbook was far harder than either of them expected. 2 years passed, and they had only finished the first chapter. Julia did not feel discouraged. She even sent the unfinished manuscript to her close friend Avis back in America, while repeatedly reminding her to keep it secret. But Avis could not resist sharing the manuscript with an editor at a publishing house. To everyone's surprise, the publisher actually liked it and even sent Julia a $250 advance. Just when Julia was ready to throw herself fully into the book, Paul received a new work assignment. The couple had to leave Paris and move to Marseille. After that, they moved again to Germany, and later to Norway. Because of these constant relocations, the cookbook was delayed again and again. It was not until 6 full years later that the manuscript was finally completed. Julia and her writing partner immediately returned to America. Only then did her partner discover that Julia and Avis had been writing letters to each other for 8 years. The two women met with the same publisher who had once praised their manuscript, but this time, the response was not what they expected. The publisher believed the 700-page cookbook was far too long and demanded major cuts. If they refused, the book would not be published. For Julia, hearing that 8 years of work might be rejected was a devastating blow. But Avis remained calm. She simply suggested that they find another publisher. Julia, however, refused to give up so easily. She decided to reorganize the manuscript and try once more. Another year passed. Julia sent out the revised version, only to receive an even harsher result. The publisher rejected the book again, this time claiming that it would cost too much to produce.
Someone is going to publish your book. Someone is going to read your book and realize what you've done. Your book is going to change the world. Because your book is amazing. Do you hear me?
Paul comforted Julia with warmth and patience, but his support was not only emotional. Not long afterward, Avis quietly passed the manuscript to another publisher in Boston. That decision brought Julia to another important person in her life, an editor named Judith. After taking the manuscript home, Judith followed the instructions exactly and made beef bourguignon. It was the kind of rich French dish she had thought could only be served in an expensive restaurant, but with Julia's manuscript, she had made it in her own kitchen. Judith immediately understood the value of the book. Under her suggestion, the cookbook received its unforgettable title, Mastering the Art of French Cooking. By then, Julia and Paul had returned to America and settled into what seemed like a quiet early retirement. Then, on an ordinary afternoon, Julia finally received the cookbook that would one day change how countless Americans ate. By that time, she was no longer young, but the legendary chapter of her life had only just begun. Soon after, Julia appeared on television for the first time. Because she was not yet famous, the host barely paid attention to her before the broadcast. Even as the countdown began, he was still busy fixing his own appearance and had not really spoken with her. After giving a slightly teasing introduction, the host turned the program over to Julia.
Would you happen to know where the outlet is?
But Julia's first move instantly caught everyone off guard. The host froze. The producer was confused. After all, this was supposed to be a book discussion show. Guests usually came on, talked about their new book, and left. No one expected Julia to actually cook, but Julia calmly reached into her bag and pulled out a portable hot plate. Then she began searching for an outlet. The cameraman tried to film the tabletop, but accidentally caught Julia from behind, nearly creating an awkward live television moment. Yet Julia did not panic. She simply took out a non-stick pan, cracked a few eggs, and started cooking right there in the studio. The stunned host could only follow along as Julia naturally turned the broadcast into her own kitchen. Watching from home, Avis understood immediately. Only Julia, her wonderfully unusual friend, could do something this bold and unexpected. Before long, a beautiful French-style omelette was ready. And just like that, the program came to an end. Julia still felt she had more to say. She had barely even promoted the cookbook she had spent 10 years creating, but what she left behind was far more powerful than a simple book advertisement. Her ease, humor, and confidence on camera stayed in the mind of a young assistant producer. After the show, that assistant producer came over to express her admiration. She understood that many young people like herself usually grabbed a quick fast food meal after work, but Julia's book offered them something different. It showed them that ordinary people can also live with flavor, elegance, and a little bit of courage. That night, Julia suddenly woke from sleep feeling tightness in her chest. The next day, she went to the hospital for an examination. The doctor told her there was nothing seriously wrong. It was simply a normal reaction to menopause. But for Julia, who had always longed for a child, the news struck like thunder. She wanted to tell Paul immediately, but when she remembered how low he had been since being forced into retirement, she swallowed the words instead. Just then, Julia happened to meet Avis's daughter and granddaughter on the street.
It's nice to see you.
I made a French omelet for Norman this morning. It came out perfect.
Their conversation gave her a new idea. Maybe she could use television to personally teach viewers how to cook French food. Julia wrote a simple proposal and gave it to Alice, the assistant producer at the Boston television station. At that time, television had not yet become part of every home. To many producers, the idea of a cooking show sounded strange, risky, and almost laughable. Alice quickly reminded them that after Julia's last appearance, the station had received 27 letters from viewers. Every letter praised Julia. Every viewer wanted to see her again.
27, huh?
Soon, Alice invited Julia to the station for a proper meeting. The next morning, Julia arrived at the Boston television station carrying a Queen of Sheba cake she had made herself. The moment she stepped inside, a staff member stopped her.
I've made a dozen or so of your recipes so far. I've never been to France, but now my husband says we don't have to.
Tell your husband that Julia Child says he must take you to France. Yes, and that's an order.
The cake she brought the day warmed up the meeting perfectly, but Alice's next words quickly poured cold water over Julia's excitement. Alice admitted that she was only the station's only female assistant producer. She believed in Julia's idea, but the senior producers did not.
Where are these gentlemen?
That was when Julia made a proposal that shocked everyone. She would pay for the first episode herself. If the audience liked it, then they could continue working together. The executive producers still had doubts, but he could not refuse such a generous offer. It was just like the cake in front of him.
Cut me a slice.
He knew he wanted to take a bite. Julia returned home and told Paul what had happened, hoping he would make the final decision. But retirement had changed Paul. He was no longer the man who supported every choice without hesitation. Besides, they did not even own a television.
Thank you for being honest with me.
To protect his pride, Julia did not say what she truly felt. Instead, she went to Avis and asked her to help persuade him, while making it seem as if Paul had reached the decision on his own. But Avis told her the truth. Paul had become stubborn, and if she tried to persuade him directly, the conversation would probably end badly. However, there was one person who might be able to convince him.
Really respects to rally his troops.
So Julia invited Judith, the influential editor who had helped bring her cookbook into the world. Judith had always had a special fondness for Julia, and she rarely refused her requests. That evening, fresh oysters sat on the table, along with lobsters newly caught from the Atlantic, surrounded by friends and food.
So how can I be of service?
Julia finally spoke about the frustration she had been carrying for days. When Judith arrived, she did more than support a cooking show. She turned the idea into something grander, with history, culture, and elegant persuasion. She described the program as a bridge between America and France. Her words awakened Paul's memories of his proud years as a diplomat in France. Soon, Paul's eyes lit up again.
So true. And yet I've never heard it articulated so beautifully.
He began excitedly imagining what the program could become.
in a forest of dandelions, a beacon shining her light into the darkness of the American kitchen.
It's too much, Paul.
But you're a star.
Seeing her husband finally stand behind her, Julia accepted the challenge. At almost the same time, she received her first royalty check from the publisher. It was $3,000, enough to buy a television, enough to produce the pilot episode. Julia was already past 50. She was not French by birth. She was not a famous restaurant chef, but she carried a simple and beautiful dream. She wanted to bring refined French cooking into ordinary American homes. For that dream, she had spent 10 years writing a cookbook, and because of one unexpected television appearance, she now wanted to create a cooking show of her own, but in an era when television was still new. Almost everyone at the station thought the idea was unrealistic. Even though the executive producer agreed to film one pilot episode, no one had ever made a show like this before. No one knew whether audiences would accept it, and no one knew whether the station manager would allow it to continue. With all these worries pressing down on her, Julia's confidence slowly began to shake. As the recording date came closer, she once again turned to Judith for help. The next day, Judith ignored her publisher's objections, canceled a meeting with the famous novelist John Updike, and rushed overnight from New York to Boston. Alice, several close friends, and Paul all joined the preparation. Together, they worked to turn a 4-hour French cocoa vin into a 28-minute television episode. But when everyone arrived at the studio full of confidence, they discovered that the kitchen had not been set up the way Julia had requested.
Nothing's where it's supposed to be.
Julia had no choice but to change the plan on the spot. Before filming even began, the powerful studio lights nearly drained all her strength. Worse still, the producer treated the entire recording carelessly, wanting only to finish quickly. He even made joking remarks about Judith. But when he learned that Judith was editing John Updike's manuscript, his arrogance quickly disappeared. With Paul and her friends encouraging her from the side, Julia slowly found the rhythm she had built during rehearsal. During the recording, mistakes and surprises kept happening, but Julia handled each awkward moment with her natural humor. She did not try to look perfect. She simply made the kitchen feel alive. When the filming finally ended, Julia breathed a long sigh of relief, but there was still disappointment in her eyes.
Thank you all. Truly. I'm sorry if I let you down.
After she and the others left, the crew gathered around the fragrant cocoa vin and began eating happily. Back at home, Julia was so nervous that she did not even dare to turn on the television and watch the finished episode. But no one expected what happened after the program aired. The station manager had a completely different reaction from the other producers. After watching the episode with his wife, he was deeply charmed by Julia's warmth, humor, and relaxed style. Even his wife, who was not skilled in the kitchen, followed Julia's steps and managed to make a delicious French dish. The station manager immediately approved the budget for the show. Because of his foresight, the first major cooking program in American television history, The French Chef, officially entered homes across the country. As more and more television stations began broadcasting the program, Julia's name quickly spread across America, and her story comes to an end here. This film was based on the real life of Julia Child, a woman who became a legend in French cooking. It is not a story about becoming successful while young. It is a story about discovering your passion when most people think life has already been decided. Many people believe that once they reach a certain age, their life can no longer change. But Julia proved the opposite. She treated that age not as an ending, but as a brand new beginning. And with courage, warmth, and a kitchen full of possibilities, she stepped straight into the life that had been waiting for her.
As a matter of fact, I have a secret to tell you. That's the key not only to the kitchen, but to life itself. This is Julia Child. Bon appetit.